good evening, and a very warm welcome to Day 2 of Stroud Book Festival 2020, wherever you're joining us from. I'm Caroline Sanderson, Artistic Director of the festival. Books make you kinder and infinitely more interesting. So said author Abby Elphinstone in her brilliant event for local primary schools this morning. We couldn't agree more. That's our mantra for today. Huge thanks to her and to James Carter for 2 fabulous events and to the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society for sponsoring them. Tonight, we present 2 events which remind us that even while we are battling a public health emergency, the climate emergency also requires our full attention. Stroud Book Festival is committed to including a sustainable Stroud strand in our programme every year, and this year is no exception. At 8:30 this evening, we welcome broadcaster and campaigner Jonathon Porritt to talk about his book, Hope in Hell, A Decade to Confront the Climate Emergency, with Charlie Mitchell of Transition Stroud. Now, we present a tribute to the late Polly Higgins, the extraordinary earth lawyer and mover and shaker in the environmental justice movement. Her book, Dare to be Great, contains a wealth of insights from her own remarkable life journey, with the aim of inspiring us to recognise and step into the greatness that lies within all of us. We'd like to say a huge thank you to Flint Books, Polly's publisher, for sponsoring this event. Sadly, due to family issues, Jini Reddy is no longer available to join us, but we have an excellent panel, ready and waiting nonetheless. I'm now going to hand over to Anita van Rossum, our chair for this event.
Hello, good evening everyone, and welcome to this tribute evening to Polly Higgins. And I would like to welcome Jonathon Porritt and Maddy Harland, my co-conversationalists, because I'm hoping that this wonderful book of Polly's, Dare to be Great, is really, I know when Flint Books were looking at publishing, they were thinking they needed books that would spark conversation. And so I'm hoping that we will indeed spark conversation between us, and I'm sure we will. So just quickly, my story, how I came to be doing this. I met Polly in 2014, and I felt very inspired by her person and the way she brought the energy and the commitment to what she was doing. And I also considered her work with which she was engaged incredibly important and urgent for our world, even more so now, but particularly at that time it very much impressed me. And I just got the feeling that I needed to help. I needed to do something in some way. I'm not a lawyer, but in some way I wanted to contribute to her endeavour in whatever way I could. And so I wrote to her, and at that time I was living in West Sussex, and I'd lived there for 20 years. And I wrote to Polly, not really hoping for a response, and I said, I just want to come and I want to do what I can to help you, because I feel what you do is so important and of such great value. She answered, and I came, and I upped and left, much to my friends' amazement, and completely moved. And after 20 years in Chichester, I came to Stroud, where I still am, to be with Polly and to help in each way, in every way I could. And so I consider it a great privilege that actually I'm here tonight sharing this event for Polly. That's part of what I came here for. So Maddy, would you kindly introduce yourself to our viewers and hear a little bit about your story of how you met Polly?
So I co-founded Permaculture Magazine in the early 90s, and I started publishing books. When we started, permaculture was very much an Australian phenomena, and there was nothing about adapting the philosophy and the design process of permaculture for northern temperate climates. And we felt, husband Tim and I, that it would be a really useful move to start to explore a very nascent permaculture movement then and publish books, that because we were trying to implement systems in this climate, and it was a big adaptation process. So that was the beginning of things. But quite a few years later, around the same time as you, Anita, I heard about ecocide, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting to use law to determine international agreements and behaviours. So I contacted Polly and said, can I interview you? So early one morning, we had what was then a Skype call. And from that call, I wrote an article all about ecocide for Permaculture Magazine. And that started an ongoing conversation between us, because Polly had such an incredible spirit and warmth, and I would say she is such fun, because she still lives on in her words and videos. And it prompted a deep friendship. And I was lucky enough to go to the mock ecocide trial and attend other key events in the progress of the ecocide movement, and I've always kept a keen interest and became an earth protector when that was launched. So that was really the basis of it. And we always promised each other we'd get together and drink malt whiskey and have fun, but we were always far too busy with our relative work to do so, unfortunately.
And what about you, Jonathon? Where did you tell us a little bit about your story, although I know you're very well known, but maybe fill us in a bit, and also how you met Polly?
Hello, everyone. So I've sort of been at this great work, as Polly calls it, since 1974, still hard at it, trying all sorts of different things, including the political route and author route and everything else. And I can't actually remember the year when I first met Polly, because I have a completely terrible mind for dates, but it was at Findhorn, I do remember that, and one of the earlier conferences that she attended. I was also in Findhorn, as it happened completely coincidentally, on the night that she died. And that was an extraordinarily moving moment for all of us gathered at that conference. Polly had been due to speak there, but she couldn't. And it was that evening that we heard that she died. The first time I met her, sorry about this, Maddy, we did actually get to drink whiskey. So I'm sorry you missed out on that, because that was always a rare treat. And actually, it's probably the only claim to fame I might have in any regard whatsoever in terms of helping Polly along her ecocide route. Was we ended up talking about the Whanganui River in New Zealand. And the only reason for that is that my dad was a New Zealander and was born in Whanganui, which is the town on this wonderful river on the west coast of the North Island. And the Whanganui River, at that stage, there was a huge discussion going on in New Zealand led essentially by Maori activists, I can call them, with a lot of legal backing, whether the Whanganui River could be declared to be a person in its right with legal rights and status for its own purpose in terms of how the river could be protected in the future. And that was at the very early stages of Earth law, when a number of different ideas were moving forward, a lot of them in South America, but this was one which was quite close to coming to fruition. And of course it did in 2016. And Polly, it was great fun talking about that, because I could connect to New Zealand and the Maori heritage, which of course has been a really important part of all of this story about Earth law now, going back more than 10 years.
Right. So let's see the first video clip. So let's hear Polly's story. Let's begin to introduce Polly.
7 years ago, I was standing in the Royal Courts of Justice in London. I'm a barrister. And it was the very last day of a long-running case where I had been representing a man who had been very badly injured and harmed in the workplace. And I was his lawyer, and I was giving voice on his behalf in court. There was a moment of silence while we waited for the judges to come into the room. And at that moment, I looked out of the window, and I got thinking, let me move this. I looked out and I thought, you know, the earth has also been badly injured and harmed. And something needs to be done about that. My next thought actually changed my life. I thought, the earth is in need of a good lawyer. Now, that was a thought that didn't leave me alone. And I went away and I thought about it. And I thought, well, you know, as a lawyer in court, where are the tools that I need to represent the earth in court? And what I realized was that they didn't exist. So I started thinking about this. What do I need to put in place for this? What if the earth had rights? After all, we as humans have rights. The most important right of all, of course, is our right to life. What if the earth had the right to life as well? And I spoke to other lawyers about this, and they said, Polly, you're mad. Of course the earth doesn't have rights.
Right, so now when we listen to that, this is 2012, and Polly has had a light bulb moment. She's been working as a corporate lawyer, and she's seen very often situations of gross negligence going on, risk-taking recklessly, and yet no apparent conscience or accountability or responsibility. And so she suddenly gets herself to a point where actually that becomes something which she found unbearable, and she was no longer able to accept it. She could no longer align with it. And so therefore, she took this great step and she said, the earth needs a good lawyer. And that was really the beginning of the great story. Obviously, a lot went before it, but if we're looking for a starting point, you could say that's it, the light bulb moment. So there we have, beginning to understand Polly's story, Polly the person. You have obviously a woman of courage, a woman of vision and clarity and conscience, a woman of decisiveness, and also, to my way of thinking, an indomitable spirit when you consider the corporate interests against which she was actually proposing to set herself up as a challenge. So I think I would like to know, I mean, what do you both think about that? Is that something to you that you both can align yourselves with? Because, you know, we all in our walk, we all have moments where there has to be that choice of stepping into a deciding point to actually do what I know to be right for my own life, my own integrity. And I know you talk, Jonathon, about your feeling of your integrity at the moment in what is going on and where you stand after all the years, you know, in everything you've been doing. So I'd like to know, how does that impact on you, that moment of making that decision, what Polly would have said, enough, no more, the tipping point in a personal life, which then actually has a huge kind of catalytic effect in the outer life, in the professional and the personal, obviously, but the professional application in the outer world. Who would like to say something about that first? Just go for it.
I could quickly, and then hopefully it'll warm Jonathan's heart and he'll step in too. So for me, it was in the very early 90s. Although I had been working as an editor and an environmental journalist, so I had this thread of green running through me from, university onwards. But from a career decision, there had to be a kind of jumping out of the plane and hoping the parachute would open. And that came in the early 90s when we decided to dedicate ourselves entirely to publishing a magazine and books about a subject that virtually nobody had a clue about. And Jonathon actually wrote the foreword to our first book, Permaculture in a Nutshell, in 1993, and that for us was incredibly important because obviously he'd been established in the green movement, both politically and in other ways for, as you said, since the 70s. And we were the newbies proposing this odd behaviour at the time called permaculture. And it was a difficult decision. We already had a little baby by then, and another one was on the way. So from a financial perspective and one of stability, to leave our careers in the normal publishing world where we both worked and sort of set out on this pathway without any job security or financial backing or any guaranteed income was extremely risky. But we were mad and young and incredibly optimistic, and we had this fabulous of youth that we could do it because we had boundless energy.
Yeah. What about you, Jonathan? What about you have to say to this moment of stepping into the choice point?
Well, the first thing to say is you did do it, Maddy. So there you are. These youthful moments are pretty important. It's sort of a tiny bit different for me because I got involved by virtue of reading a very small book that came out in 1972 called Blueprint for Survival, published by the Ecologist magazine, which is a very succinct way of explaining why we would be getting ourselves into the kind of mess which we find ourselves in today. It kind of pretty much mapped it all out in 110 pages or something like that. Inspired, of course, by Teddy Goldsmith. Polly and Teddy Goldsmith would have got on like a house on fire. In fact, they would have had an amazing time together. It would have been great to be a fly on that imaginary wall. I suppose the one time where I had to make a decision of that kind, I'd been teaching for 10 years. I'd been in the Green Party for 10 years, but throughout that time I'd been teaching. And I honestly thought I would probably stay in teaching because I loved teaching and it was very close to my heart. And it's a silly anecdote, but I was actually looking around for my next job in teaching and saw the advert for the job of director of Friends of the Earth and thought to myself, good Lord, you get paid for doing all this green work. That's pretty amazing. So I applied and got through to the final round. And at that stage, I was thinking to myself, do I really want to give up teaching? I really love the job I do. I mean, I had 10 absolutely astonishing years combined with Green Party activism. So it was a nice pairing for me. Do I want to give up that teaching role so I'm 100% then in the green world? And I honestly thought when I went to Friends of the Earth that I would probably be back in teaching within 5 or 6 years and resume a more or less conventional teaching role as the environment looked after itself again. So it was a funny one. I am pretty pleased that I took the decision I took at that stage, but that was the only moment where I had to make a really hard and fast, difficult decision at that time.
Right. Thank you, Jonathan. I would like to unpack the book because this is a book festival. And I mean, usually the author would be here to explain and enlighten us about the intention. However, with deep regret, our wonderful Polly is no longer here and is not with us. So I'm kind of charged with this, but I need you, Jonathan and Maddy, to help me, please. So unpacking the book. Okay, it's called Dare to be Great. Now, this is actually a book, believe it or not, which is about Polly's journey. It's very personal. And in fact, it's so personal that when I read it, it's almost like she's in the room speaking to me because it is her language, you know, it's her speak. It's the way she walks her talk. And she certainly did it. So this is not a self-help book of somebody recommending what you should do if you want to make a difference. She was finding her way. She offers us her experience as a guide. And I mean, when she starts off, she says, you know, what you are holding in your hand, let me see if I can get this in the camera. I can't, it's floating around in completely the wrong place. Anyway, what you are holding in your hand, i.e. her book, Dare to be Great, is a gift. It is in part my story and my quest. And it is in part, sorry, where am I? I've lost my bit. It is in part a gift to you, so your quest can be fast-tracked. So we're talking about a quest, and a quest is a very particular word, isn't it? It's a kind of journey, it's a pathway, it's a seeking, a searching, it's a vision, it's a yearning. There's a destination at the end, but there's this feeling that the journey somehow is more important than the actual arriving. Now, this is participatory, the book, so you're not just reading what Polly did, you're invited to take part. So there are keys and tools and dreams and imaginings. So it is hugely playful and hugely creative. So you're really invited to take part in this book and take part in your own quest. Jojo Mehta, Polly's great friend and colleague and co-founder of the Stop Ecocide campaign, she said, and I do agree with her, she said, reading the book, Dare to be Great, is the nearest you can get to having a conversation with Polly. And that is really, really exactly the way it is. And so in this book, then, she is, however, going into quite high-flying realms of human existence, because we could really say it is a call to step into our true power of being, the true potential of being human. And this, of course, in Polly's terms, and for all of us, as we know, is critically important at this time, at this planetary moment. Do we step in or do we lie low? Do we wake up and realize what's happening, or do we batten down the hatches and pretend it isn't? So this is about the quest. Yeah. So what I would like to ask Maddy and Jonathon, I suppose the first question would be, if you had somebody, and it could be a young person, it could be not necessarily young. I think that for all of us, many of us, we so care and we so want to help. There is such a feeling of impotence and powerlessness. What would you say to somebody who really wants to make a difference? Because this is actually what Polly's book is about. So let's hear your ideas first. Jonathon, can you give it a go to start?
I would not invite them to read Polly's book.
Okay. Do you want to unpack that, please?
Only because only framed the question as in someone who is coming, as it were, from knowing they need to do something but not quite sure what it is that they need to do. And I think that would be quite a challenge to lay Polly's book on them at that stage in their own personal journey, in their own question. And I say that because we shouldn't necessarily take it for granted that stepping in for all people is a spiritual thing. There are an awful lot of people who've stepped right in to the challenge of doing something about ecocide in the world today who don't have a deep spiritual center to what they do. Yeah. And are more driven by, it might be social justice concerns, concerns about the planet, about other creatures, whatever it might be. And they probably do have, as it were, spiritual values, but they don't necessarily have a deep sense of themselves being driven by that spiritual heart. And therefore, I would be more cautious about suggesting that that was the only way to get into the business of being fully committed as a servant of something more important than ourselves. So that's not a criticism of the book. It's just the point that people are at is a sensitive one, and we have to recognize that and think about how best to advise people on that journey. And for young people in particular, I would be cautious about that, because it implies that there's a sort of route to this that is open to literally everybody to seize hold of that potential greatness. And maybe we'll come back, Anita, to the notion of greatness, because it troubles me, I have to admit. Okay. And I'm not sure I'd stick that on young people either.
Okay. Maddy, what's your take on?
So there's a story in the book about Polly as a schoolgirl with glasses, feeling teased and vulnerable and quite disempowered. So different from the Polly as an adult who's so beautiful and articulate and powerful. So that fascinated me, and the story of her going back and walking past her school and seeing it all boarded up and realizing that she was free of the constraints of the wounding that she experienced as a girl. So I suppose my take would be, for anyone wanting to step up, is be gentle with yourself. Know where your wounding is. Get to know your trigger points, so that you have a level, work on your self-awareness as much as we need to work on our skills in articulation or public speaking or organisation or whatever it is that we're doing to try and make a difference in the world. We also need to have a sense of our own journey from child onwards and get to know who we are, so that we can overcome the aspects of ourselves that tell us that we're an imposter or hold ourselves back. And different people need this more than others, but I think it is an important aspect. And once you have that growing self-awareness, you can be more supportive towards other people and less judgmental and less critical of their where they fall short, and be hugely encouraging. And that's the I felt from Polly, was that she was very charismatic but also very encouraging, and inclusive with people. She wanted to take people with her on the journey and convince them in many ways that they too could participate. It wasn't the hero's lonely old journey all on our own. We're not alone. So that would be one aspect that I would choose. But also, I think if we are seeking to make a difference in life, we have to look at how we lead, and always to lead through example is far better than telling people what they ought to do.
I'm just the other person who would have been a participant tonight, who we sadly missed, Jini Reddy, who also has written a wonderful book called Wanderland about her deep alignment with nature. And I got a few words from her, what her encounter with Polly is really linking into what you're saying, Maddy. She said, Polly inspired me on a personal level, and in terms of what I felt to be her alignment with what it means to not look at nature in the conventional way. She was a supportive person at a time when I really needed that. She helped me to feel seen. She just had a way of lifting you up. Polly told me she saw me as a bridge and asked me when was I going to write my book. So, and I think, I know you used the word spiritual, Jonathon, and I think you're absolutely right. There is a spiritual aspect to the book. And of course, Polly had this incredible combination of somebody who was a rigorous legal mind and a deeply spiritual being, which, with respect to legal minds, I hope they won't mind me saying, isn't a usual combination, So she was also very playful, very practical, and somehow she managed to bring all the things together in a kind of beautiful symphony. And this book, I did ask, I said I wanted to unpack the book. She is particularly talking about what she calls inner ecocides. So the inner ecocides are a bit what Maddy's been talking about, what triggers you? What is it that you've experienced in the past? So what she would be saying to young people, Jonathon, and I'm defending a little bit here, because I think it is an excellent book for young people. And in fact, part of our work now is called the Earth Protector Communities, which is a kind of grassroots endeavor to give people at local level tools to do the work I mean, the Stop Ecocide is your diplomatic, your high-level initiative with the ICC. But, you know, the people on the ground, we also want to make a difference. And of course we can in our individual lives and in our local communities. So we start with, okay, actually, you've got to start with yourself. And you've got to, as Maddy said, have a look at what it is that really angers you. I mean, XR have this wonderful thing where all the people who take part, the first thing they do is deal with their own anger, because you cannot afford to get out there in civil disobedience and behave badly. You need to be in control, and you need to understand what you're doing there. You're there for a greater cause, not just to express your own anger and aggression. So I think the first part of the book about Dare to be Great is the inner ecocide, and the idea being that if you can come to terms with that in whatever way you can, then you are equipped to be able to move on to earth care. And I think that for young people in particular, being given the chance to really have that understanding and that support and the playfulness of the tools, you know, try this exercise and see what you think of that. This is how it was for me. We have actually worked out a toolkit based on Dare to be Great for community interaction to assist people to find their way, because it's not easy. Polly's not saying this is easy. On the contrary, she had many difficulties of her own, huge difficulties to deal with, and she did that with great rigor and great integrity. Okay, so moving on. I mean, she talks about the inner ecocide as a feeling of being out of kilter, you know, like all is not well. And of course, the collective ecocide, which is now we're experiencing, we know well what that is like, you know, where so much is out of kilter and out of balance. So have there been times, I'm wondering, that kind of resonates for you, you know, that you felt this kind of out of kilter? And I'm not wishing that to be a personally invasive question. Of course, I'm talking more about the feeling of how you're working in the world and what you're trying to do, that something is a bit out of kilter. That, I don't know, does that an interesting question? Because if it isn't, please tell me and we can move on to something else.
I suppose I'm struggling a bit, Anita, because I don't actually know what an inner ecocide is. I mean, I've known throughout my life many people who've gone through incredible struggles with their own lives and what's out of kilter with them at different points. I've never heard anybody describe it as something like an inner ecocide. And it actually doesn't mean anything to me at all, because ecocide is something that, by definition, almost is inflicted on other parts of this living world by human beings. If you describe something as an inner ecocide, it means that you are inflicting something on yourself as a consequence of being out of kilter. And that isn't necessarily what makes life out of kilter for a very large number of people. It's a complicated phrase for me, and a lot rests on it in the book. And because I don't really understand it, I don't feel it helps me grapple with this issue about what we do to enable people to go through those emotional stresses and often traumas and do that healing work, do that anger management stuff, find a resolution in themselves. It just doesn't create that sense of a solution for the individual.
Okay, it doesn't convince you. Yeah. Maddy, what do you think about that?
I think, I mean, there have been times in my life where I have felt held back, invisible, not perhaps taken seriously or recognised for the work that I've done. And I think that is partly because I have lived in a world which is quite patriarchal. And so, you know, the world has changed enormously in the last 40 years. But I always remember my father saying to me, never learn to type, otherwise you'll end up a secretary, because I was a girl. that was his, his advice to me. If you don't give yourself the skills of the servants of the system, unless you want to be subdued by the system. So I've always been quite, as Jonathon knows, fairly outspoken and very determined to walk the path that I'd chosen for myself. But in doing that, you leave yourself, or I have left myself at times, quite vulnerable, quite exposed, feeling unsupported, very challenged. And I think that's when, I don't fully understand the concept of inner ecocide for the reasons that Jonathon's given, but I can understand, if our inner life is an ecosystem, how it can be hugely disrupted by the difficulties of all the patterning around us. And I think that still goes on. We had this period of time where Me Too was, a real breakthrough moment where the unspeakable was spoken. And I think this still needs to happen and continue as part of our process of accepting what we see as the other in our lives and in society. And if Jini was here, she would be able to speak really articulately about that sense of being the other and not being able to integrate and feel a part of, the society or the interest group that you're perhaps trying to contribute to and represent.
Yeah. So the book is called Dare to be Great. So, I mean, in the title, daring, I mean, to me, that implies risk-taking, courage, possibly facing your fears. But the word great, as Jonathon was saying, I'm not quite sure about this greatness. What does that really mean? And I mean, great is such an overdone word in the language, isn't it? Oh, it's great. Oh, you're great. Oh, we had a great time. So, I mean, what is greatness? Now, I know what Polly means by that, but I'm just wondering for both of you, what do you perceive as greatness, either out there or in your own lives? Would you say, Jonathon, I'm great? Or would you not wish to actually acknowledge your greatness? I don't know. Can we just have a quick look at that? What do you think about the greatness angle, Jonathon?
No, I would never use that word in that context at all. I mean, I would describe what other people are doing as great or initiatives as great, but fairly colloquially. And it's I don't know, maybe I've heard President Trump, or hopefully soon to be ex-President Trump, say it so many times. It's just a complicated word to use. I just mischievously wrote on the title of my copy of Dare to be Great, I just put Dare to be Alive, because for me, and I love this book, by the way, don't get me wrong. I think it's a beautiful book, and it's incredibly important in many, many ways. But what Polly, I think, is after is actually prodding people and saying, maybe you're not fully alive to what your own potential is. Maybe you've kind of settled with a 50, 60, 70% notion of the fullness of what you can offer other people in your chance to be of service to other people and great causes. And so this is only, we've already surfaced the fact I'm an ex-English teacher, so maybe I'm just getting a bit hung up here on the word. I think in terms of what Polly's calling for, in terms of how she's urging us to be as good as we can be, I'm totally comfortable with that. I just, if I'd been her editor at that stage, I might have suggested, well, maybe let's have a look at this title here. But it's so wrapped up in the way she sees this as greatness in each individual.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not necessarily to be as good as we can be. You know, there's it is also about, I think you're absolutely right, it is the dare to be alive and to step into the freedom of what allows you to express yourself as fully as you were born to be. And that includes civil disobedience, because, you know, Polly was the one that started all that, because, of course, for her, it is about disrupting business as usual, or disrupting what is expected when what is expected is abusive. You have to kind of get the freedom, take the risk, and dare step into opposing, you know, particularly with civil disobedience or in whatever way is best going to work. Anyway, Maddy, sorry, I went off on one.
Not at all. Not at all. So I kind of think that it's almost tongue in cheek to call it Dare to be Great, because I can see Polly smiling over the title. It's almost, you know, it is a challenge. And yes, for me, it's, no, I don't consider myself great at all. There are many things I could have done far better in my life with the benefit of hindsight and wisdom and a bit more maturity. And there are many things that I could probably do better in the future as well. I don't think we're brought up to think of ourselves as great. I think that aspect to ourselves is kind of, by our education system, is beaten out of us, perhaps not literally anymore, but certainly, you know, we do crush through education. We do crush children's freedom to feel great, and that sense, that huge sense of play. So in a way, for me, this title is about retrieving the magical child who really believes that they can fight dragons and win. And there is that playful element in the title that's important. And really, in order for us to stand up and dedicate our lives and all of our energy professionally to the problems that we're facing in the world, we do need to all be collectively great. But the only way we can do that is by what my friend and author Luby McNamara calls the great collaboration. That we're taught to work in silos and compare negatively and make judgments and divide up into disciplines. And somehow we've got to find this cohesion that overcomes our differences and our sense of otherness and alienation between us, and enter into a great collaboration. And I've often said that, you know, we had a war cabinet in the Second World War, and climate change will require a climate change cabinet, and there cannot be party lines to score points on in solving the problems of the world.
Exactly.
You know, at some point we are all going to have to step up out of selfishness and into greatness.
What you were saying at the beginning, Maddy, about the title, that you felt it was quite playful. Kind of playful. In fact, Polly's original title was "I Dare You to Be Great."
Yes, and I had that
of course. So I mean, that is exactly where she was coming from. And I must say, you know, during the years that I was with her and endeavoring to work and to help and to support her, there were moments that I knew if I was going to do something, I felt a resistance, you know, and I felt rather not, you know, rather go in the opposite direction. And then I would say to myself, I'd say, come on, dare to be great. And I'd go in and do it. And afterwards, that felt so amazingly good, because, you know, that is a kind of a freedom that you actually become who you truly are. And I recommend it. Right. So we're all going to dare to be great. That's decided. So now you were saying, Maddy, when you just were drawing to a close, about the current situation and the collective this tipping point, the enough no more that Polly found in her own career. I cannot countenance this, so I cannot turn my back on it. I have to choose a different direction. So for us now, there is this collective unbearable, which is leading, I hope, I don't know if you agree, to a collective tipping point of enough no more. We cannot continue business as usual. Or do we? Do we just take the easy way out and, things can't change? And, like with the abolition of slavery, the idea was that if the slavery was abolished, the whole economic system would collapse, but it didn't. And now the same arguments are being used. We can't do without business as usual, or our whole economic system will collapse. So do we radically turn around and take a different path? And that is really what we are faced with, isn't it? And so this is where we come to ecocide and the law of ecocide and Polly's work as probably a very, very significant example of that taking a different path and saying no to business as usual. So we've got a short video clip about her talking about how she actually manifested that. So she had the vision, she had the thought and the intention, she set the intention, and she developed this declaration of the Earth Protector and the trustee of the earth. So this is where she is explaining that. So could we just have the second little clip, please?
I can't remember.
What I have created has never been done before. It is completely unprecedented. I have created an Earth Protectors Trust Fund document. This document is a declaration of love. It is an acknowledgement that the Earth, its ecosystems, and the inhabitants of the Earth, whether human or otherwise, have the right to peaceful enjoyment. It is a declaration of belief that this peaceful enjoyment is both a moral and legal right, and that any human act or omission that severely diminishes such peaceful enjoyment is a crime. This is law in the making, and this is the law that we can take forward to bring to an end ecosystem destruction and to enable climate justice. A higher moral code is something we all profoundly understand. When we align human law with higher law, harmony can prevail.
Right. So here we are with the work, the great legacy work of Polly. So that initial decision, the earth needs a good lawyer, and the perception as Polly went forward to really research that and study that and dedicate her life to that, to find that there was what she described as missing law. And so corporate power has no accountability, because obviously their priority in the eyes of the law, they have a legal duty to make a profit for the shareholders. And there is no duty of care during that process of making the profit. And so that was the missing law. And so what Polly needed to find was that legal duty of care. And what she came up with was the law of ecocide. So international criminal law, which is a law that protects, so I mean, criminal law protects our lives because we have the right to life, and murder is a criminal law which protects our life because you don't just go out there and kill people. But the problem is with the earth, there is no protection of life on earth. And in that original clip we had, where Polly said to other lawyers, what if the earth had the right to life? We have the right to life, those of us who enjoy the benefits of being on the earth. and everything we need we derive from the earth. We have the right to life. But what if the earth had the right to life? And Polly says that at the end of the clip, if you remember. And they all said to her, the other lawyers, Polly, you're mad. Of course the earth doesn't have rights, doesn't have the right to life. And it's interesting because right now we are having, quite consecutive decisions in high places to bring in the rights of life, of the earth and of nature. And as you were saying, Jonathon, the right of a river to have legal rights. So what I'm wondering with this is then, I'm just going to say one more thing. I'm remembering when I first started with Polly. Now, this was 2015. It wasn't just 5 years ago. And I remember I was super enthusiastic and I was talking to everyone, everybody. I had Ecocide coming out of my ears and everybody got dosed up. And my kids used to say, oh, mother, enough, not any more of that, please. You're boring people. But what I remember was that when I would talk to people, they always used to come with the same reaction. They'd say, yes, but that's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. It's impossible. So now, Jonathon, I'm thinking of where you're writing in the book about what is possible. And you quote Nelson Mandela. Do you remember that bit? It always seems impossible until it's done. And Polly, she said, because she was very funny, and she said, when people say it's impossible, you're onto a good thing. So what do you feel, both of you, about the possible? Because we are in a situation right now of critical turning point without much time. We know there's a lot of technological advance and tremendous hope in that, Jonathon, as you describe so incredibly in your book, which I really enjoyed because that gave me some hope. But how do we really feel about the possibility? Is this going to be, it's impossible until it's done, because we are going to do it? What do you both feel about that? And the law of ecocide as being an absolute specific in that impossible turning point, which will make the difference.
You go ahead, Maddy.
So what do I think? I think that even when we have a law of ecocide, people will still commit ecocide because people still commit genocide. That is, if there is a possibility, then humans will do it. I also think that the envelope of possibility has to be stretched always, that we don't, Rob Hopkins talks a lot about imagination and what if and the power of imagination. And I mentioned the limitations of our education, our collective education. And he talks a lot about, what if we educated children to have expansive flights of the imagination rather than suppress that? It would be a very, very different world. So I do feel that our concept of the possible is limited by our thinking, and that we as adaptive evolutionary creatures are capable of changing the way that we think. Not en masse, as we've evidenced in America in the last few months. How some of that thinking occurs is quite astonishing. But I also believe in tipping points, that when there is enough of a minority that feels differently about an issue, then change comes, despite the majority that might be asleep. And we know that politicians have to be led by their mandate. They cannot innovate. It's not until dear old Rishi realises that to furlough for a month in England is good enough or not good enough, and he's got to do it for Scotland and Wales retrospectively until March. That is because of public opinion. That isn't because that's a policy that that was adopted and thought of up in-house. That is because the reality is that there's a groundswell of public opinion that says, no, that is utterly unfair to separate the economic picture for the 4 countries in the United Kingdom. We have to do better than that. So there is a response. And I think with ecocide, somehow this COVID crisis, it is altering people's values. It is a collective pressing of the pause button. And I know that it's socially very difficult. And of course, it's easy to press a pause button if you're work from home and you're still in employment and you can go outside and exercise and you're not stuck 5 floors up in a little flat with 4 babies under 5. I mean, this is about privilege, and we have to recognize that in what we're saying. But there is a kind of collective pause and a reassessment of what really matters to us. What do we really value? We love our friends. We value seeing our family. Those fundamental freedoms that don't cost anything are what really come first. They're much more important than, a 6-figure salary, effectively. And the other thing is that we love to see the resurgence of nature.
Yeah.
We love the clear skies. We love the stories of the dolphins in the Venetian canals and the deer rampaging through, villages, eating gardens in the Netherlands. We love this resurgence of the wild. And I think, so although there will always be aspects of humanity that are destructive, yes, of course we have to enshrine the protection of habitats and ecosystems in law, and it needs to be embedded on many different levels. But I always worry slightly when we enter a conversation that's them and us, because we're all shareholders of the earth.
Exactly.
And I run a company. It's only a small company, but I am fundamentally someone who's been in business since I graduated from university. I've won a Queen's Award for Enterprise, back in the day, and I don't want to push most of the corporate world into a sort of space that is one of alienation, because many people do care, but they just feel trapped in a system that is like a puzzle that can't be undone. And so I feel like greatness is about us stepping up and presenting a phased unpicking of the puzzle. And I know with Jonathon's work, he's worked so hard over the years to enter into this dialogue with business, with the corporate world, and bring in social responsibility and ethics in a world that hasn't operated like that, out of, I don't know, where we evolved out of, I suppose, slavery. So that's my kind of mixed smorgasbord of thoughts, many threads that perhaps Jonathon might want to weave together in a response. No pressure.
No. I think there's no doubt that the notion of ecocide is the heart of Polly's legacy. It is an enormously important contribution that she's made to trying to understand better where we are in the world today and what we need to do about it.
Yeah.
And the fact that legacy continues now through the Stop Ecocide campaign very forcefully, actually, is enormously encouraging. So I think, for me, ecocide is such an important idea, not because there aren't laws about protecting the environment. There are literally so many laws about protecting the environment, you can hardly believe it. And in the most improbable places, Russia has one of the best set of environmental laws on their statute books of any country in the world. They are all flagrantly disregarded from start to finish. most of what the companies are doing today is completely legal.
Yeah.
Mining companies do what they do because it's completely legal.
Yeah.
In the Amazon today, those people who are cutting down the forests are doing it because their president, Jair Bolsonaro, has said, please go to the Amazon, cut down some forest and start planting crops, whatever it might be, or ranging cattle, because that's what this country needs. This is all completely legal. So the point about ecocide is not that it's necessarily directed solely against wealth creators in the private sector, but it is as much about governments. And actually, Maddy, you're right. The genocide analogy is really important because in my sense of it, ecocide is at least as much about holding governments to account in a formal court of law as holding the private sector wealth creators. So
Exactly.
This for me is a really important side of it. Is it doable? Is it feasible? Well, I've just been having quite a bit of fun trying out some ideas about what might be achieved by 2025. And because of the work of the Stop Ecocide campaign and all the brilliant stuff that Jojo and the campaign are doing, as you probably know, signatories to including the crime of ecocide in the Statute of Rome are starting to come forward. So the process is underway. There was a massively important breakthrough when in France, the Citizens Commission on Climate Change asked Macron to hold a referendum in France on whether or not ecocide should be included in the French legal system as a crime. And if that referendum goes ahead in France and the French citizens say, yep, we want ecocide on our statute book, that is an absolutely massive breakthrough. So is it doable? Yes. Is it doable in time to stop as many of the terrible things that are still going on today? That's the question mark, because these are slow processes. And one of the most astonishing things about Polly was her commitment to a process which by definition was often agonizingly slow, because legal processes often are agonizingly slow, in a world which demands incredible urgency. And that is the story. How can the pace of bringing ecocide into the Statute of Rome, into the International Criminal Court, how can that pace be accelerated so it begins to play its part in the range of solutions that we have available to us? That's the real challenge.
And of course, for Polly, a very important part of it was that everyone is a part of putting their weight behind that. This is where she talked about setting intent, that if you make an intent, actually collectively, if you get behind that, then that will fast track a great idea whose time has come. And so I would say that one of the simplest, most simple thing that we can all do, if we haven't already done it, is go to the Stop Ecocide website and sign. There is a petition to support the demand for the law of ecocide, and then sign up to be an earth protector. Because, what that is doing, apart from it being your personal commitment to care for the earth, it is actually putting your weight behind that collective intent. And that does indeed, like Maddy was talking about, the public pressure for the decision to be made in government to change the policy on the fur law. It is absolutely clear that public pressure and public demand, that will make a difference. And this is just so important. We need to do it. It is a vital requirement of all of us as responsible citizens of the earth. It's the great endeavor of our time, and Polly knew this, and she dedicated her life to it. So we've got some questions coming in. So maybe we could look at a few of those, if that's all right with everyone. Let's have a look and see. Okay, so I just need to choose a couple here. There's a gentleman here called Pete, and he says, who enforces the law who is going to hold the corporate murder of the planet accountable? Do you want to go for that one, Jonathan?
Yes, well, as I understand it, were ecocide to be included in those crimes against humanity alongside genocide and all the rest of it, then plaintiffs could bring their case to the International Criminal Court with all the evidence that they would need to demonstrate that a company or a government had indeed breached this whole understanding of damage to the environment, irreparable. I think the wording is a little bit difficult, and I don't want to get this wrong because Jojo will get really cross with me, but it's something like irreparable or irreversible damage to the environment, whatever it might be. The thing about this is that is a crucial reminder to governments in their own countries that they have to start enforcing the laws that they've got in their own countries much more effectively. We have a terrible situation, even in the UK. I shouldn't really be dumping my complaints about this on Russia. We have very good laws in this country, but many of them are not being properly implemented. We have great laws about protecting, for instance, sites of special scientific interest up to Natural England to make that whole. The government has reduced the funding for Natural England so much that they don't have enough firepower now to go out and prosecute breaches of damage done to SSSIs all over this country. So you might say, let's start in our own backyard. Let's get our government to make its laws really work to help protect nature. So I think in the first instance, we are reliant on governments to implement and enforce their own laws. But the great thing about ecocide is it scales it right up. It says if governments are failing to do what they need to do to protect our oikos, our home, then those governments themselves must be held to account. And it is only the International Criminal Court that can do that. Because again, to use the analogy, they have successfully prosecuted those responsible for genocide. Perhaps not as many as we would like, but at least we can see that there is a process which sometimes ends up in a proper legal outcome with people properly held to account and punished.
And just referring back, Maddy, to what you were saying when you started talking about, you think, people will always commit genocide and always commit ecocide. But I remember somebody saying that in a meeting when I was with Polly. And she said, they were saying, what's the point of a law of ecocide? Because you've got a law of genocide and genocide still happen. And she said, yes, but there is a law.
Well, exactly.
And that's the difference. Exactly. And that's just what Jonathon is saying.
Fundamental principle.
Yes.
That if there is a law, there is a structure and there is a pathway. And as you observed, Jonathon, it's not, it's not used as often as we would like, and it doesn't always have the gravitas and power, but at least the precedent exists, and you can only begin from a precedent in law to start change. And that's the whole point of this. And the whole point of all of Polly's work was that she understood how to create a precedent in law internationally. And from that, you change an entire planetary culture. But it is overnight.
Okay, I've got another question here from somebody called Gardner, who says, I've been working with connecting people to overlooked or misused spaces. I find it difficult to get over my own fears of people doubting my integrity. Have you experienced this? Do you have any advice?
Gosh, well, Maddy, you spend quite a lot of time trying to connect people to sometimes unloved spaces that they may not have understood the true potential of. I think you need to deal with that one.
I suppose so, yeah. Having been involved with the Sustainability Centre, that was a naval base. It was an inshore naval base that was shut down after the Cold War and became redundant and unloved and derelict. And we took it over in around 1995 and have begun this very slow but incredibly steady process of cleaning up the land and removing the asbestos and all the sort of odd bits of military waste and brutal sort of concretized inefficient buildings, and very slowly transforming it into an educational centre that serves the local community and beyond, and children and adults. So I mean, I think and people thought we were mad, but we actually thought that we had 50 odd acres of real estate in an area of outstanding natural beauty that couldn't just be developed into executive Hampshire housing by Berkeley Homes. So I think perseverance, and find people that have it's so important that we don't do things on our own. It's so important that we have, we develop magnetism. I mean, of all the most magnetic people I've ever met in my life, definitely Polly was one. She had enormous charisma, and was so energizing and fun. And I think we have to work on projects with our own passions, but we need not to overwhelm others. So you said the story of your kids telling you, be quiet about ecocide. We've heard too much of it. Do say that to me. For sake, Mum, don't talk to us about bloody permaculture. Recently beekeeping, which has been a little bit of a phase that I love. So, I think we have to learn to collaborate. I'm going back to that, and to inspire and support each other. And know that, when we do work on even the most modest, derelict patch of land, it makes a difference. It creates habitat. It's small acts of beauty are very important in this world.
Right. So the next thing, Polly always had a particular interpretation of emergency. And so I'd like to know what you think about that, because if we were ever in emergency, we're in one now. So normally emergency sounds very negative. It's crisis, it's bad news. However, for Polly, typical of her, she always turned it round. She said an emergency for her is the opportunity, it's the potential for something new to emerge. And so I would like to know if you feel this idea of emergency as an opportunity for something to emerge, if that creates a useful framework for the climate breakdown, for the pandemic, and for the ecological crisis.
It could do, if I may jump in. It could do. The problem is that not enough people see what's happening to the climate as an emergency. They see it as a problem that is getting worse and worse every year, which we will, eventually, have to deal with. And the contrast between dealing with a public health emergency, COVID-19, and the climate emergency, the contrast couldn't be starker. It's what is often referred to as the tragedy of the horizon. The public health emergency is in our faces right now, hundreds, thousands of people dying, and we have to deal with it. The climate emergency is not in our faces. It's kind of not in enough people's faces, let me put it like that, because the lives of millions of people are already profoundly disrupted by climate change. But it's not seen to be an emergency in the same way. So not enough, to go back to Polly's idea, not enough of new thinking is emerging to address that climate emergency. We're still using pretty old-fashioned ideas. Instead of ordinary growth, we're going to have green growth. Instead of conventional energy sources, we're going to have green energy sources. We're not really talking about deeper issues, about shifting the whole pattern of the economy, about getting away from consumerism, about learning to do things completely different at the community level, about learning to be much better servants of this different agenda. So I don't think right now that we've got the critical mass for emergence of that kind, as Polly described it, to be a powerful force in our lives. But I can tell you, we're not far off. You know, this climate story is getting closer and closer to being in our faces. And at the point that it is, then we will definitely find a different pattern of response from people.
Yeah. Okay, Maddy.
Well, I mean, the key to emergence also is that the sum is greater than the parts. So we can think we know what's going to happen, but when we're pushed beyond our limits and our expectations, that's when something is emergent, and that's when the unexpected comes in, and our concept of possibility becomes reorganized and stretched. And yes, I think it's absolutely inevitable that is going to happen, and very, very quickly now. But it won't come through, unfortunately, the pattern is at the moment is that we will not learn collectively through signposting, but only through tragedy. It's not terribly cheerful.
Well, one thing that is cheering is the story of, the progress of the law of ecocide. It is remarkable the way it is ramping up, it is accelerating, and I mean, it's extremely exciting what is going on. And it really, we always used to say with Polly, it's not if there will be a law of ecocide, it's when. And remarkably, she said 2020. I could be wrong, but 2020. And really, this is the year that actually it has galvanized into real possibility, isn't it? So that is extremely hopeful and extremely exciting and positive for everyone.
And Jonathan's just hinted at the possibilities of alternative scenarios, that it's not about just swapping one technology for another. It's not about changing one behavior for another. It's about embracing a completely different way of living, and a way of living that actually is preferable and saner, and I think more we'll get to a point where it's just so much more wholesome. Most of humanity are deeply unhappy because they're chasing a dream that they can't have. And really, this shift is going to bring in a real change in values that we need collectively.
Polly has a sorry.
And then ecocide isn't at a logic, because it's embedded in those very different values.
I was just going to say that Polly has a section of the book where she talks about a law. The vision is the earth without ecocide, an earth that thrives without ecocide. And she visions that, of how that will look. And it is just glorious to read. I can imagine being there, and it is totally enjoyable and fulfilling and refreshing. It's not, pie in the sky. It is a reality that we can achieve if we are, willing to make the changes and daring to be great. Right. So we're just going to finish with one last clip, which is called Greatness as Legacy. So if we listen to that, and then we'll be finishing. So if we could have that.
Greatness as a legacy. When we truly believe that we can make a difference and are committed to effecting great change, giving up is not an option. If anything, it's those moments of crystallization that drives us forward each time. When we are committed to act, the setbacks drive us forward to an even higher gear, and the refusal to let go seeds within us a strength that cannot be surpassed. Every step we take, even if we do not know where it will lead, and even when it's a setback, is a step that leads us to a very different place. Being in service is a conscious decision to effect great change in one's lifetime for the greater good. How that is done arises out of the commitment. We all have unique gifts. Everything we require to help us discover what our exceptional gifts are can be found all around us. It's just that it's not always apparent. How often has it been that, with the benefit of hindsight, you have looked back and said of something upsetting that it was, in fact, a gift in disguise? Have you ever felt pushed when you did not want to move? And yet, now that you see, you can tell that it was very much for the best in the larger scheme of things. The challenge is to let go of the sense that whomever did the pushing acted unjustly. To bear the grudge is to remain enslaved to the desire to punish. It used to be thought that leaving a legacy was only for the realms of kings and popes. It's not a title that determines legacy, however. Each and every one of us leaves a legacy. A legacy that is truly great, however, speaks of fearlessness in the face of opposition, taking action, even when in fear, for something greater than the self, standing up and speaking out, even when no one else will, setting a course that brings humanity closer to peace. That is a legacy that we can all commit to. It is also a legacy without attachment to outcome, for the long-term results may never be seen or understood in our lifetimes. Legacy, to me, speaks of intrinsic values made manifest. It is also for the future. What I can do in my lifetime so that long after I've gone, many whom I shall never meet shall live a life in greater peace. What do I choose to bequeath to the future? What is my legacy? What is yours?
So, the legacy of Polly Higgins. I love the bit where she says, what I can do in my lifetime so that long after I've gone, many of those whom I shall never meet live a life in greater peace. And so, Jonathon and Maddy, what would you say? What would you wish to have as your legacy? What would you wish to be remembered for? And presumably, how does that inform what you do now? Is that a very challenging question?
No, I mean it takes us away from Polly at the moment. I want to make the connection back to her, if I may, because there's a wonderful anecdote in Dare to Be Great, which we could have shared, which is an anecdote about a friend of hers who was a British diplomat in Kenya, who decided at a really critical moment to go into the hospital and rescue Wangari Maathai. And Wangari Maathai was this utterly extraordinary activist and utterly brilliant woman, great friend of mine, and a truly astonishing person. And Polly's friend went into the hospital at a moment of great danger to Wangari and to himself, and rescued her and took her out. And there's a lovely little moment where Polly says that all that Wangari could do was to write on a piece of paper, GUINAO, standing for giving up is not an option. And to be honest, that was very moving, not least because I see Wangari and Polly as two kind of incredibly similar warriors. Sorry if that's too militaristic a image for some people, but that's how I see them, and servant leaders. And for me, that's very clear that giving up is not an option. It never was for Polly. So I have a very simple conclusion that I've never met anybody whose life wasn't blessed by the presence of Polly when she was alive. And today, I don't meet anybody who isn't excited by the power of the legacy that is now being taken forward in her name. That's a pretty remarkable achievement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Mm. Do you want to follow up on that, Maddy?
I'll just say that I hope that my legacy is that I've taken permaculture out of the garden and into the world and made the links between looking at a nature-based design system and understanding that we can base the design of our relationships with each other and in community on those natural principles, and indeed how we organise our business and our commerce and our education. And I hope that that would be an aspect of my legacy in the future. But we live in a society that doesn't really do very well, or eldership, or that sense of lineage and connection to ancestors. And I think that's a very important aspect of society. And I'm delighted to see this book coming out and the wonderful intentions and progress of the whole ecocide movement and the breakthroughs that have come this year. And I'd like to end by really celebrating that and just remembering Polly thinking strategically in terms of her funeral evening even, and saying, hey, okay, yes, we're going to mourn, but let's make it unbelievably good event and let's use it as something that can further communicate the power of Stop Ecocide. And let's also have a biofuel Daimler. So there always has to be style with Polly. Never do anything by halves.
Yeah.
And a damn fine malt whiskey behind the bar.
True.
So, so I want to celebrate that. You spoke earlier about, setting intentions and then really following them through, and not only on a work ethic level, because she worked incredibly hard, but on the level of celebration and joy as well.
Yeah, thank you, Maddy. Absolutely. So we're going to draw to a close, and I would like to say a huge thank you to Maddy Harland, who has a new book out, Fertile Edges. Do read. Very beautiful book. Many years of Maddy's journey and experience. And a huge thank you to Jonathon Porritt, who actually in a very short time is going to be talking about his new book, A Hope in Hell. And I think it's 8:30 at our Stroud Book Festival. So please tune into that. And fantastic book. I can vouch for that, but I haven't quite finished it, but I will do. I hope that everybody listening has learnt about Polly and learnt about the book and its potential for inspiring you to dare to be great in whatever you do. Daring to be great is very much about being your true self and living your true potential. It doesn't mean you have to win the Nobel Prize. It's not about greatness or celebrity in that sense. And so daring to be great happens when you are ready to set sail. And I'm going to finish with my very favorite quote from the book. Great ships. When a great ship is in harbor and anchored, it is safe. Of that there can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are built for. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Anita, and thank you, Jonathon, and thank you, Maddy, for that really stirring and immensely thoughtful tribute to a remarkable woman. We're really honoured to host it here at Stroud Book Festival, and I wish we could all be drinking a glass of more whiskey together right now. So don't forget that you can buy copies of Polly's book, Dare to Be Great, published by our sponsors, Flint Books. Thank you again to them. You can buy it from Stroud Bookshop, our festival booksellers, stroudbookshop.com. We urge you to buy it from there or from your local independent bookshop at this very difficult time for independent retailers. Thank you again for joining us, and please remember, yes, that Jonathon Porritt will be coming up again very soon, 8:30, in conversation with Charlie Mitchell from Transition Stroud.